Where are you watching this from? The question lingered like fog on a windshield, a voiceover soft, but charged with something weighty, an invitation or warning. Outside, the night rain thickened, slanting sideways under gusty November winds. The wipers of Nate Carver's old truck groaned rhythmically metal against glass, barely holding back the cascade. He squinted through the blurry windshield headlights slicing through the darkness of Maple Avenue. Home was still 5 minutes away. Rosie was probably asleep by now, curled up with that stuffed elephant that was missing one eye and half its stuffing. Just 21 days. That courtroom calendar circled in red. 21 days until a judge would decide whether he would lose the one thing that made life worth enduring. Suddenly, a flash of hazard lights on the shoulder. A red sedan tilted slightly toward the ditch blinked distress with quiet desperation. Standing beside it was a lone figure soaked to the bone, struggling to keep her phone dry under a tiny, useless umbrella. Her coat clung to her like paper. One heel had sunk into the mud. Don't stop. It was late. It wasn't safe. But then his father's voice, as real as the wind. Don't walk past trouble if there's light left in you, son. Even a flicker can save a night. Nate pulled over. The gravel crunched under his boots as he stepped out. Rain lashed against his face. The woman didn't notice him at first, too busy pressing her phone to her ear with one hand and holding the useless umbrella with the other. Her frustration was palpable. Ma'am Nate called out, keeping a respectful distance. "You all right?" She turned, startled. Her face in the flickering glow of the hazards was sharp but weary. Rain traced lines down her cheeks that could have been mistaken for tears. "My car died," she said. Her voice was composed, but there was strain beneath it. It just stopped. No signal, no engine light, nothing. Nate gave a short nod and approached, hands visible, palms up. Years of working in other people's homes had taught him the value of non-threatening body language. "I do some repair work around town. Mind if I take a quick look?" She hesitated, searching his face, then gave a small nod. "Be my guest." Nate popped the hood, the familiar smell of damp metal and worn rubber wafting up. A few minutes of quiet concentration, a flashlight balanced on his shoulder, and he found it a frayed ground wire arching against the frame. Classic short. "I've got something in the truck," he said, heading back to fetch his old repair kit, half tools, half prayers. With a weathered length of copper wire and some nearly expired electrical tape, he patched the connection. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold for the night. Try it now. She climbed in, turned the key. The engine sputtered, caught, then purred to life. Her head dropped to the steering wheel in relief. "You're a magician," she exhaled, stepping back out. Nate gave a half smile. "Just stubborn." She pulled out a wallet, but he raised his hand quickly. "No charge. Just replace that ground wire first chance you get. And maybe carry a better umbrella." She smiled for the first time. It changed her face entirely. "At least let me know your name, in case I need a miracle again." "Nate Carver." She repeated it quietly as if committing it to memory. "You just saved more than a night, Mr. Carver." They stood for a moment, rain still falling but softer now, like the sky had exhaled. Then she climbed in the red sedan, merging back onto the road and vanishing into the wet black. Nate returned to his truck, heart unexpectedly warm, but as he shifted into drive, a voice returned, this time not his father's. A courtroom, a judge, a wooden gavel falling hard, and a calendar marked in red. 21 days. 21 days until that gavel decided whether Rosie would stay his daughter. The camera of the imagination pulled back. The rain continued falling on Maple Avenue, quiet but unrelenting. Somewhere, the sound of a distant train moaned through the valley. Inside the truck, the wipers resumed their tired rhythm, and a voice whispered once more, "Where are you watching this from?" The morning sun offered no warmth. It simply rose out of habit. Nate Carver stood at the small kitchen counter, staring down at a piece of burnt toast. Not golden brown, not edible. Just black on one side and stubborn on the other. Another breakfast masterpiece, he muttered. Burnt toast means the day can only get better, Rosie chimed behind him. She was already dressed in her school hoodie, one sock inside-out backpack slung too low. She was 8 small for her age, but somehow full-sized in spirit. Always had been. Born during a thunderstorm, raised on takeout and bedtime stories, toughened by a world that didn't give handouts to people like the Carvers. Nate buttered the toast anyway. Word of the day, he asked. Rosie leaned on the table, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she concentrated. Then, with a triumphant grin, she whispered, "Together." He turned toward her, his face softening. "Tough one?" She nodded. "But it's our word." And it was. A secret pact between them. If she could spell it out loud each morning, no matter what the day held, it meant they were still in it together. She spelled it slowly, carefully pausing between each letter. T-O-G-E-T-H-E-R. He clapped once mock applause. "College-bound already. I'll take a scholarship to Hogwarts, please." They laughed, but it faded too quickly. On the fridge, stuck beneath a magnet shaped like a wrench, was a calendar. And circled in bold red ink like blood sealed on parchment was a date. 3 weeks from now. Custody hearing. Courtroom 4B. That circle didn't just mean a court date. It meant the line between being Rosie's father and becoming her memory. Nate's old pickup coughed its way into the lot behind Jensen Hardware. He was 10 minutes late. Again. His manager, Gary, stood with arms folded and disappointment perched on his face like it lived there rent-free. "You're becoming a Sunrise regular Carver." Nate slid out of the truck, toolbox in hand. There was traffic on "Don't finish that sentence unless it ends with Mars." Gary turned and walked toward the service entrance. "You're good at what you do, but good doesn't pay if it shows up late." Nate nodded silently, guilt tightening around his throat. The job was part-time. Fixing shelf brackets, rewiring ceiling lights, restocking plumbing aisles. It didn't offer health insurance. It barely paid the rent. But it was work, and for now, that was everything. That afternoon, he sat across a scuffed metal desk from Maya Chen, his court-appointed attorney. Young sharp, the kind of lawyer who didn't wear power suits but carried power in her words. Her office was cramped, piled with file boxes, most labeled in blue marker and half crossed out. She pored over his case with the intensity of someone solving a jigsaw puzzle underwater. "They're using a paper trail," she said. "Theft of property industrial generator from a locked site allegedly on your work route." Nate sighed. "I didn't steal anything." "I believe you," Maya said without missing a beat. "But the system doesn't work on belief. It works on evidence. And they've got copies of statements, time logs, blurry security footage. All circumstantial, but enough to muddy the water." "Can they take her from me?" His voice cracked on her. Maya looked up, finally meeting his eyes. "If the court believes you knowingly falsified records or were part of a theft, yes, especially with no mother on record and no legal guardian in place." Nate leaned back, staring at the ceiling like it might offer a better verdict. "Victor Hale's behind this." Maya nodded grimly. "He's powerful, owner of Hale Development. Big contracts, big friends. He claims the generator was on site when his crew left. No shipping logs, no security confirmation. Just vanished." "He's trying to bury me," Nate muttered. "Because I reported that site for faulty wiring last year. They had kids working near exposed transformers." "You're not crazy," Maya said. "But proving motive is harder than it sounds." Nate rubbed his eyes. "So, what do we do?" She smiled, then just faintly. The kind of smile that showed up in dark rooms holding a flashlight. "We dig. We subpoena. We peel back every layer until there's nothing left to hide behind." He exhaled, shoulders dropping an inch. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a cheap plastic recorder. She slid it across the table. "Start talking. Everything you remember about that site that night, your routine, your schedule, even if it seems small." Nate hesitated, then clicked the record button. "I remember the wind that night. It was sharp, like it wanted to cut through metal. By evening, Rosie was back from school. Her shoes were muddy and her backpack weighed more than her. She dropped it by the door like it had personally offended her. "Spelling quiz tomorrow," she declared. "Guess who's gonna ace it?" Nate gave her a high five. "Word." She grinned. Together. He smiled, but his eyes flicked to the fridge. That red circle still bled in his mind. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. After dinner, she curled up on the couch, drawing in her sketchpad stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. One of them had a beard. The other had glasses. The little one had a cape. "I'm a superhero," she explained proudly. "You are," he said. Later that night, when Rosie was asleep, Nate stood in the doorway of her room. The glow and the dark stars they'd stuck to her ceiling still faintly shimmered. He whispered to no one, "She's my reason, my everything, and I will not lose her." The silence answered back. The next morning, the calendar still hung on the fridge, but this time beside the red circle, Nate scribbled something small, almost imperceptible. Together. He capped the pen, took a breath, and faced the day. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Brooks." The bailiff's voice cracked through the room like thunder through glass. Everyone stood, every sound, every whisper folded into silence. Nate Carver's pulse thudded in his ears. His palms were damp, his throat dry. He rose slowly, eyes locked on the wooden bench at the front of courtroom 4B. And then he froze. The woman in the black robe was not a stranger. Under the solemn light framed by the seal of the state was the same woman he'd met on Maple Avenue, the one stranded in the storm. Her hair now perfectly pinned, her posture steady as marble. Only her eyes gave her away. He'd seen them under lightning wet with rain, soft with gratitude. Now they were unreadable. She's the judge. The thought slammed into him like cold water. Eleanor Brooks looked out across the courtroom, gaze sweeping methodically. When it passed over Nate, she hesitated just for a breath, no more. Then the mask of professionalism returned, and she spoke. "Please be seated." Chairs scraped, paper rustled. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the air. Maya leaned closer to Nate, whispering, "She's fair. Tough, but fair. Don't say anything unless I cue you." He nodded, eyes still fixed on the bench. She had no hint of recognition on her face, none at all. If she remembered that night, she hid it well. Across the aisle sat Victor Hale, silver hair, slicked back cufflinks gleaming like arrogance personified. His attorney, a polished man with a permanent smirk, shuffled papers theatrically. The smell of expensive cologne hung heavy in the air. The clerk began State versus Nathan Carver. Allegation theft of property valued at $72,000, obstruction of contractual delivery, and fraud by falsified documentation. Each word landed like a hammer. Maya stood, voice calm but edged with fire. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. The opposing counsel has submitted copies of documents that cannot be verified, including unsigned shipping logs and altered timestamps. We are requesting all original materials for inspection." The prosecutor rose lazily. "Your Honor, the originals are unavailable due to ongoing audit." Judge Brooks lifted a hand. "Unavailable is not a legal term, Mr. Reynolds. Produce the originals or validly certified duplicates." Reynolds adjusted his tie. "We have sworn statements. Statements are not substitutes for evidence." Eleanor cut in her tone, cold steel wrapped in velvet. 12 years on this bench, Mr. Reynolds, and I've yet to rule on a feeling." A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. Nate couldn't help it. He almost smiled. Eleanor turned toward Maya. "Ms. Chen, your motion for examination of source documents is granted. The court will reconvene once forensic verification is complete. Thank you, Your Honor." Gavel down. Sharp. Final. The sound echoed in Nate's chest like a heartbeat. Outside the courtroom, Maya exhaled. "That went better than I hoped. She's no pushover." Nate followed her into the hallway. She's the one. The one what the woman from that night. The car on Maple Avenue. I fixed her engine. Maya stopped mid-step, blinking. You're serious? He nodded. She never said who she was. Maya considered this, tapping her folder against her leg. Well, small towns breed strange coincidences. And it's not just coincidence, Nate said quietly. She's the reason I'm even standing here. I could have driven past. I didn't. Maya placed a hand on his shoulder firm. Listen to me. Whatever connection you think you have, forget it. Judges live by one rule: impartiality. If she's as ethical as she seems, she'll pretend you never met. He swallowed hard. That's the part that hurts. Inside the judge's chambers, Eleanor Brooks leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for one brief moment. The storm of the courtroom still rumbled behind her eyelids. He remembered me. She could see it in his eyes, the flicker of recognition, the shock, the quiet dignity in how he carried it. She shouldn't care. She shouldn't even think about it. But she did. On her desk sat the file, Carver Nathan. Custody implications, accusations. A photograph clipped to the corner, Nate and a little girl smiling under a wooden porch light. She studied it for too long. The memory of Rain flashed back. His voice, calm, unassuming. No charge. Just replace that ground wire before it bites back. The decency in that moment had disarmed her more than she admitted. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Soft, Southern-wise justice stands when you measure every beam, not when you admire the paint. Eleanor opened her eyes, exhaled, and straightened the papers before her. All right, she murmured to no one. We'll do this by the book. That night, Nate put Rosie to bed early. She asked him to read Charlotte's Web again, and though he'd already read it 5 times, he agreed. Her eyelids drooped halfway through the chapter where Charlotte wrote, "Some pig in her web." "Daddy." She mumbled, half asleep. "What's court like?" He hesitated. "It's a place where people try to find the truth." "Do they always find it?" He looked at her so small, so trusting, and whispered, "They try. That's what matters." She smiled faintly and drifted off. Later, Nate sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the court summons. The ticking wall clock marked every second like a slow drip of doubt. He whispered to himself, "She didn't know who I was. She didn't owe me anything. And yet, she gave me a fair chance." He traced the rim of his coffee mug absently. Maybe that's what justice really looks like. Meanwhile, Eleanor drove home in silence. Her windshield reflected the courthouse lights fading behind her. She passed the Maple Avenue intersection without meaning to, glancing once toward the roadside where the storm had once stranded her. She remembered his face under that rain-steady selfless, and the sentence she'd spoken that night before leaving, "You just saved more than a night, Mr. Carver." Now she wondered if she'd spoken truer words than she realized. The next morning, the courthouse corridors hummed again. Nate arrived early wearing his one good shirt. Maya carried her briefcase like a weapon. Across the hall, Victor Hale stood surrounded by his team, laughing too loudly. Maya whispered, "Today's just procedural. She's ordering an independent audit of Hale's equipment logs." Nate nodded. Good. When the bailiff called their case again, Eleanor entered with the same calm grace. But when her eyes briefly met Nate's, something flickered, something that wasn't there before. Not recognition exactly, not warmth, just humanity. She adjusted her glasses, voice steady. "This court will order the forensic department to authenticate the original shipment data telematics and GPS logs from Hale Construction. Until then, this matter is postponed." The gavel came down once more. Sharp, clean. No thunder this time, just the quiet certainty of order restored, if only for now. As everyone began to file out, Nate stood motionless. Eleanor gathered her papers, and for the briefest heartbeat she looked up. Their eyes met. Not the gaze of a judge and a defendant, something older, deeper. A wordless acknowledgement. Then, just as quickly, she looked away. In the hallway, Maya whispered, "See that she's not against us. She's giving us room to breathe." Nate nodded, though his chest ached with something he couldn't name. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, promising rain again. He whispered to himself, almost smiling. Funny thing about storms, they always circle back to where they began. Eleanor Brooks had learned early that the smallest decisions made the largest architecture of a life. She sat alone in the judge's conference room after hours. The courtroom lights dimmed to the hush of sleeping files. The city outside breathed in steely gusts of November wind. Her hands rested on a stack of paper carver's file at the top, its edges softened from too many readings. The courthouse felt like a house of beams and braces to her every precedent, a joist, every statute a nail. If one beam bowed, the whole structure could inch toward ruin. She had been a girl who watched her mother clip index cards behind the school office desk, watching teachers borrow schedules like sacramental bread. Her mother, Mabel Brooks, had a way of folding truth into plain things. Measure the wood, Ellie Mabel would say, tapping a ruler against oak. If you want a porch that holds, don't guess the span, because it looks pretty. Measure, square it, then nail it down right. Eleanor could still hear that voice in the quiet justice stands when you measure every beam, not when you admire the paint. Now she measured. She thought of the man, Nate Carver, whose face she had seen twice in the last day, once under a raincoat fixing a ground wire, and once standing under the courtroom's fluorescent truth. She thought of the way his eyes had gone soft when he looked at his daughter's photograph in the file. She thought of how small kindness could make a person larger in your memory. Judges were taught to be blindfolded at the bench figuratively assuredly, but Eleanor had learned that blindness was a myth. She could not unsee the human being sitting there in the dark or the girl with the cape in the photograph. The question was not whether she felt. The question was what to do with what she felt. She tapped a pencil against the legal pad, the sound measured, deliberate. There were lines to walk impartiality and empathy, duty and mercy. The law asked for clarity. Life asked for mercy. The trick was to hold both without breaking either. Her clerk knocked and left a folder on the desk. It was a compilation of the motions, Maya's request for source documents, the prosecution's evasive language, Victor Hale's affidavit. Eleanor read them again slower this time, as though the words might change if she peered at their syllables long enough. There was a temptation, subtle and human, to expedite the case, to push for a swift judgment because it would please some, because power often expected speed in return for silence. There was a second temptation to recuse herself, quietly citing a conflict, allowing the machinery to roll on without her fingerprints smudging the wood. But recusal, she knew, was not an escape from responsibility. It was an admission that someone else might better measure the beam. And sometimes the community needed someone who remembered what a porch felt like beneath wet feet. She stood and walked to the window. Beyond the courthouse, Maple Avenue shimmered with puddles. Somewhere under that wet asphalt, the memory of a single night threaded through the town, a man who had stopped a woman whose car had died. Eleanor thought of impartiality taught as ritual. She had memorized lines as a young lawyer, how to separate your life from your robe. But the robe did not erase conscience. It simply required that conscience be made visible through reason. She drafted an order. Order for independent forensic verification of all disputed evidence, she wrote. Then she added specifics: the nails she would drive, telematics records, GPS data shipping, chain of custody. Original manifests, raw CCTV footage with timecode certified hardware serial numbers and confirmation of who had physical access to the storage yard the night in question. She underlined chain of custody 3 times. It was the spine of proof. Without a sealed chain, papers were just paper, easy to copy, easy to alter. Her finger paused over the signature line. She imagined a rumor Judge Brooks is soft on defendants she meets and felt the weight of it like a hand on a scale. Her career had been a long exercise in avoiding the appearance of bias. Now, however, the question wasn't about appearance. It was about result. If the evidence were tainted, the justice she administered would be hollow. If evidence were clean, then the law would speak with clarity. She signed. Justice isn't the absence of feeling, she whispered to the empty room. It's the courage to test it. Her clerk returned with a list of forensic contacts, an independent state lab, a private telematics auditor, the court's digital forensics team. Eleanor chose 2 names, one with a reputation for stubborn accuracy, one for speed and transparency. She scribbled them into the order. The work would be outside the courthouse's friendly echo, outside the county's cozy alliances. She wanted the light of an outsider's scrutiny. Night after night, she walked those corridors, sometimes past the same bench where the case would be heard again and again, each step a rehearsal of courage. A neighbor, one of the librarians from town, had called earlier to volunteer story time at the juvenile reading program. Eleanor had accepted, though the invitation had come with the faintest ripple of gossip. People talk, the librarian had said gently. They'll say things. You're still welcome. You'll tell them a story about ducklings. Eleanor replied, thinking immediately of the children who would sit with their legs crossed and imaginations open. And I'll sit quietly at the edge. In her office, she kept a small book worn at the corners, Make Way for Ducklings. She had read it in the courthouse library once to test whether a lullaby of words could still settle a person's heart after a day of legal thunder. The story spoke of bridges and guardianship and the small tasks that keep a family safe. It was, she thought, an oddly good map for the case ahead. She thought of the man again. He'd described the wind the night he'd remembered. He'd described doing the small thing, fixing a wire, rather than turning away. In her mind, that image paired with her mother's ruler, measure then nail. The small thing measured, the small thing held. By morning, the order had been filed. The court calendar adjusted. News would eventually breathe on the case, and talk would find cracks to wedge its fingers into. There would be questions. There would be gossip. There would be people who thought a judge should not remember faces from a storm. She greeted each of those possibilities like a mason greeting rain, inconvenient but not fatal. At the bench the next day she read the order aloud. Her voice sounded firm and even. This court orders that independent forensic verification be completed within 30 days. All original physical and digital evidence shall be secured and catalogued. Any failure to produce sealed chain of custody records may result in dismissal of charges. The words landed in the room with the quiet authority of measured wood shored up by iron brackets. It was not mercy. It was discipline applied to compassion. It was the law exercised with the tremor of a human heart behind it. After court, Nate watched the judge leave. He watched the careful set of her shoulders, the way she carried paper like someone who did not take flippancy lightly. Maya put a hand on his arm. She walked the line, she said. The law bent toward truth today. Nate's reply was a single breath. I hope that's enough. Eleanor crossed Maple Avenue on her way home that afternoon, her coat buttoned against the wind. She paused for a moment where the storm had once stopped her. Rain threatened, but it didn't fall. She looked down at the pavement and felt the small thrill of having measured and acted. Measure the wood, she heard her mother say in memory. Then nail it down. She had measured. She had nailed. The porch might not be finished yet, but the beams were straight. Justice, she believed, was very much like building one true cut at a time. Waiting has a sound. It's the ticking of a wall clock in a silent hallway. It's the low hum of vending machines, the rustle of paper someone pretends to read. Its breath held between hope and heartbreak. And for Nate Carver, it was becoming a second home. The days after the judge's order moved like honey slow, heavy, uncertain. The court had granted time for forensic review, but not peace, that he had to earn minute by minute. And so he worked. By morning, he was at Jensen Hardware repairing a broken furnace for a retired schoolteacher. By afternoon, he was patching fences, changing locks, realigning door hinges. His hands stayed busy because it was the only way to quiet the storm inside. He didn't say much to the people he helped, but they remembered him. He was the man who showed up, got the job done, and asked for less than he was owed. In Cedar Falls, that kind of man left ripples. One afternoon he climbed a ladder to restring the porch swing of Mr. Connolly, the retired postman, who now lived alone with a grumpy cat, and memories that came in flashes. As Nate tightened the final knot, Mr. Connolly stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee. "Built that swing for my wife in '79, the old man said, voice like sandpaper. She used to sit out here every spring, just hummin'." He paused. "You're a good man, Carver, even if this town forgets how to say it out loud." Nate didn't know how to reply. He took the coffee and gave a quiet nod. That night he sat at the back corner of the Cedar Falls Library, Rosie nestled into his side as he read "The Wind in the Willows" aloud. She traced the illustrations with a small finger, her body warm against him, the kind of closeness that made the world bearable. "I like Mole," she whispered. "Why?" "Because he doesn't need to be big. He just needs to be kind." Nate swallowed. "Yeah, that's a good reason." Rosie looked up at him. "Are we going to be okay?" His voice cracked. "We're going to try Kiddo. That's what matters." Maya called every 3rd day. Updates came in fragments, nothing fast, nothing flashy. "We've subpoenaed Hale's digital security firm," she reported one evening. "They're stalling, but the judge's order is ironclad. Another day got GPS logs from the supplier's fleet. If they're clean, it helps. If they're not, it helps more." Still another, the chain of custody paperwork from Hale's warehouse. It has gaps, big ones. Then came a pause, a long one. Nate sat on the floor of his small kitchen phone, pressed to his ear. Rosie had gone to bed after trying to draw a giraffe that looked more like a sideways ladder. "I'm here," he said softly. Maya exhaled. "We got it, Nate." A tech from the state forensic team confirmed, "Say it plain." The generator in question, the one Hale claims was stolen, never left the warehouse that night. The serial number in the report doesn't match the GPS log. The timestamps were edited after the fact. The printed witness form was generated on a device not installed at the site until 2 months later. For a moment, Nate said nothing. Then his back slid down the cabinet until he was sitting on the linoleum floor, legs outstretched, head resting against the oven door. "I didn't imagine it," he whispered. "No," Maya said. "You lived it. Now we prove it." He didn't cry loudly. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. Like pressure leaving a pipe that had been ready to burst. Just breath and silence and 2 words that kept echoing in his mind. "We're okay." The next morning, the town looked the same. But to Nate, everything felt different. He fixed a leaky sink for a single mom down the street, tightened hinges at the local diner, delivered a small toolbox to the librarian who'd broken her drawer pull. Life wasn't suddenly solved, but it wasn't unraveling either. And in Cedar Falls, that was a kind of miracle. That night, he stood outside the courthouse, the wind lifting his collar, the sky a bruised navy blue. He didn't go inside, he just looked at the steps, because tomorrow they would walk those steps again. This time, not as the accused trying to hold his life together with tape and prayer, but as a father ready to reclaim the truth. Maya was waiting at the courthouse lobby the next morning, her coffee half full and cooling quickly. She held a thick folder in one hand and a subtle fire in her eyes. "Today," she said without smiling, "we let the evidence speak." "Will they listen?" "They'll have to," Maya replied. "Truth is a loud thing when it's cornered." He looked around. The courthouse was busy. Voices echoed, papers shuffled, but through all of it, Nate felt still centered. "I'm not scared," he said. Maya finally smiled. "That's good, because Hale should be." Rosie had left him a note that morning on the fridge written in colorful markers with backward E's and a heart instead of a period. Together. Always. "You got this, Daddy." He'd folded it into his pocket. Now he reached for it, fingertips brushing it like a lifeline. In a nearby hallway, Judge Eleanor Brooks read over the brief one final time. Every document, every timestamp, every disjointed lie laid bare on the page. She tapped the file once softly, then whispered into the quiet time to measure the beams. The gavel hadn't yet fallen. The room was still filling, But the truth was already walking the hallway step by step, file by file, heart by trembling heart. And tomorrow, it would speak. A courtroom under morning light is different. Not because the benches are softer or the stakes are lower, but because the sun has a way of crawling in through the high windows, spilling across polished floors and sealed evidence boxes like it's looking for something. Something hidden. Something long overdue. And on that morning, truth arrived, wrapped not in a dramatic confession but in chain-of-custody documents and time-stamped GPS logs. Nate Carver sat still at the defendant's table, back straight, fingers interlocked. The courtroom wasn't packed, no news cameras, no drama. But to him, it was the center of the world. Rosie had drawn a small heart on his hand with purple marker before school. A shield, she whispered, in case today is scary. He looked down at that little heart now barely smudged. Maya Chen stood beside him, composed and focused, a stack of papers in one hand, her voice cool as ice, but burning with truth. Your Honor. She began. Over the past 3 weeks, our team, along with 2 independent forensic analysts, has reviewed the documentation provided by Hale Development. What we found is not just inconsistency, it's fabrication. A murmur rippled across the room. Victor Hale's attorney rose halfway from his chair, but Judge Eleanor Brooks raised a hand, calm but firm. You'll have your turn, Mr. Reynolds. Sit. Reynolds obeyed, jaw tight. Maya walked forward, laying a printed timeline across the evidence projector. This, she said, clicking her remote, is the GPS log of Hale's generator unit. According to this data, the equipment never left the primary warehouse the night of the alleged theft. She clicked again. Next, the telematics report showing the unit's internal diagnostics. The system never registered movement. The power state was 0. And, most damning of all, the tamper alert was triggered 12 hours after the theft was reported. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Explain the alert. Maya's voice was razor-sharp. The internal software flagged manual data override. Someone tried to rewrite the location history, but the system retained its original log underneath. She paused. And then there's this. Another slide. A scan of a form time-stamped and signed. This is the witness affidavit submitted by Hale's site supervisor claiming to have seen Mr. Carver load the generator onto his truck. But, according to tech analysis, the document was printed from a machine not installed at the site until November 17th. The night in question was October 4th. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that doesn't ask questions, it answers them. Reynolds stood, his words rushed. Even if there was a discrepancy in the timeline, discrepancy Maya's tone sharpened. Your client fabricated evidence to accuse a single father of grand theft evidence that, if unchallenged, would have cost him custody of his daughter. That's not a discrepancy. That's deliberate fraud. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Her voice was level, but it carried the weight of steel. Ms. Chen, are you submitting a motion? Maya nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We request full dismissal of all charges against Nathan Carver and immediate referral of Mr. Hale's evidence for criminal investigation, including obstruction of justice and document falsification. Victor Hale shifted, his face suddenly pale, sweat beading along his brow. Reynolds tried again. Your Honor, these findings require time, for Judge Brooks raised the gavel slowly but didn't bring it down yet. Mr. Hale, she said evenly, do you wish to speak under oath before I make my ruling? Victor looked up, meeting Eleanor's eyes, and saw that there would be no negotiation. No favor, no way out. He looked away. No, Your Honor. The courtroom held its breath. Then came the sound. Crack. The gavel fell. Charges against Mr. Nathan Carver are hereby dismissed with prejudice, Eleanor declared. This court further recommends criminal referral of Victor Hale and associated parties for evidence tampering, falsifying legal documents, and attempting to subvert judicial process. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The truth had spoken, and that was louder than applause. Nate didn't move at first. He sat frozen, staring straight ahead. Maya leaned in, her voice suddenly soft. "It's over." He looked at her slowly, blinking back disbelief. "No," he said. "It's just beginning." She smiled. "Then it's beginning on the right foot." He stood slowly, then turned his eyes toward the bench. Eleanor Brooks was organizing papers methodically, professionally, but just before she stepped down, she looked at him. Not a long look, not theatrical, just enough. Their eyes met. For the second time in 3 weeks they saw each other fully, not as a mechanic and a judge, not as a favor owed, just as people. Nate gave the smallest nod, a thank you that carried more weight than a dozen speeches. Eleanor didn't nod back. She didn't smile, but the warmth in her gaze lingered a heartbeat longer than protocol allowed. Outside, the courthouse sunlight filtered through the clouds. A thin breeze carried the scent of cedar and faint chimney smoke. Nate stepped into the light, eyes closed, face lifted like someone surfacing after years underwater. He heard a voice, Rosie's echo in his mind. "You got this, Daddy." He opened his eyes. "I do, kiddo," he whispered. "We do." Later that evening, Maya sat on the hood of her car case file beside her, eating French fries from a paper bag like a warrior after battle. Nate walked over holding 2 sodas. "You don't drink, right?" "Only sarcasm," Maya said, accepting the cup. He hesitated. "You saved me." "Nope," she replied. I held the flashlight. "You walked out." He smiled. "That's a good line." "I'm a lawyer," she shrugged. "We steal all our best ones from life." They sat in silence for a minute, watching the streetlights come on one by one. "You think Hale's going down for real?" Nate asked. "If not in court, then in reputation," she replied. "Either way, his name won't shine the same anymore." Nate looked toward the horizon. "That's not why I fought." Maya glanced at him. "I know. You fought for her," she said, voice gentle now. "For Rosie. For your name. For every man who's ever been called guilty before the truth caught up." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Across town, Judge Eleanor Brooks returned home. She placed her briefcase on the counter and took off her robe with care, as if removing something sacred. She stood by the window for a long moment, watching shadows stretch across her street. Then she picked up a small frame on the table, an old photo of her mother standing in front of a chalkboard, ruler in hand, smile proud. "I measured the beam," Mama Eleanor whispered. It held. And far away, in a little girl's bedroom with glow-in-the-dark stars taped to the ceiling, Rosie Carver slept soundly. Her hands curled around a stuffed elephant missing one eye. A heart-shaped shield still marked her father's palm. And in the quiet of that night, for the first time in a long time, the world felt safe again. Wednesday afternoons at the Cedar Falls Library were always a little chaotic. Crayons rolled off tables. Picture books scattered like autumn leaves. Someone always spilled juice, and someone else cried because someone else took the red marker. But that day the children were unusually quiet. Because Judge Eleanor Brooks was reading. She sat at the front, legs crossed beneath a modest gray skirt, holding "Make Way for Ducklings" like it was a holy text. Her voice was soft but steady narration without performance, warm without condescension. When she read, and she led them back across the street, all in a line. Even the rowdy twins in the back stopped whispering. Among the group sat Rosie Carver, legs crisscrossed, hands fidgeting with the string on her hoodie. Her gaze never left Eleanor's face. When the story ended and the room stirred with noise again, Rosie turned to the boy beside her and said quietly, "She sounds like the lady from The Rain." The boy blinked. "What?" Rosie just smiled. "I think she is." Outside the reading room, Eleanor was wiping her hands on a tissue after helping clean up finger paint when a familiar voice stopped her. "Judge Brooks." She turned. Nate stood a few feet away, hat in hand, not in some performative show of deference, but the kind of instinctive gesture you do when respect runs deeper than words. He looked different out of the courtroom, more grounded, more open. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and there was sawdust clinging to his jeans. Behind him, Rosie peeked around his side, then grinned and waved. Eleanor smiled gently. "Mr. Carver." "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, voice low but clear. "I was doing my job," he nodded. "Maybe, but some folks do their job like checking a box. You read the fine print, you turned on the light." She paused, her fingers tightening just slightly around the storybook. "Truth deserves daylight." A beat passed. "I wanted to say more," he added, "but I figured if I showed up in a diner instead of a courtroom, it might be easier." She raised an eyebrow. "You're inviting a judge to lunch. I'm inviting a neighbor." Nate replied, not missing a beat. "Titles stay at the door." She considered him, head tilted slightly. "I have an hour. There's a booth open at Murphy's. Corner 1. Still smells like burnt coffee and second chances." She smiled. "Lead the way." Murphy's diner hadn't changed in 20 years. Same creaky booths. Same faded jukebox. Same waitress named Bev who somehow remembered everyone's order and nobody's birthday. Eleanor sat across from Nate, stirring her tea slowly while he poured sugar into his coffee like it owed him money. She spoke first. "I try not to eat with people I've ruled on." Nate smirked. "So, what's this A complication?" He laughed a full, unguarded sound. "Well," he said, "complications are where most real things start." The conversation took its own pace, meandering from books to weather to Rosie's love for ducks. No mention of the case, no talk of courtrooms, just life, quiet, sturdy life. At one point, Nate leaned back and looked out the window, watching the wind stir up a few leaves. "My dad used to say the law was like a house," he said. "Some doors are locked, some windows stick. But if you build it honest, it won't fall in a storm." Eleanor looked at him. "Did you believe him?" "I didn't. Not until the night you asked for the real documents instead of the convenient ones." She said nothing. Then, softly, "My mother used to say, 'Justice is measured by beams, not paint.' She was the school secretary. Never made more than 25 grand a year. But she knew how to spot a crooked frame." Nate nodded. "Sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have handed you a ruler and told you to get to work." They smiled. Then, as if on cue, Rosie rushed in from the sidewalk where she'd been playing hopscotch and proudly held up a crayon drawing. "It's you," she beamed at Eleanor. "Reading to ducklings." The stick figures were chaotic but unmistakable, Eleanor in glasses surrounded by little ducklings with happy faces. In the corner, a tiny drawing of Rosie with a speech bubble that read, "Together." Eleanor studied it for a long moment. "This is beautiful," she said. "May I keep it?" Rosie nodded solemnly. "But only if you promise to keep reading. I think I can manage that." Rosie ran back outside, leaving the drawing in Eleanor's hands. Nate watched her. "She doesn't forget kindness," he said quietly. "I'm not sure I earned it." "You didn't need to." He held her gaze, and for the first time since the courtroom, something unspoken passed between them, soft, tentative, but very real. As they stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, Eleanor tucked the drawing into her satchel. "I think," she said slowly, "it would be best if we take this slow. Public perception matters." "I agree. Rosie matters more." Nate nodded. "I'm not looking for headlines. I'm looking for porch lights." She smiled at that. "So, neighbors." "Neighbors first," he said. "Everything else can wait its turn." As if on cue, Rosie came running back, waving a flyer in her hand. "They're having a storybook parade. Next month can Scout wear a costume?" Nate laughed. "If Scout agrees to it." Eleanor leaned down. What would he be? Rosie thought hard. A detective dog. Like Sherlock Bones. They all laughed. The three of them stood on the sidewalk as the wind danced around them. Not a family. Not yet. But something beginning quiet and steady. Inside her car later that night, Eleanor unfolded the crayon drawing one more time. She traced the word "together" with the edge of her thumb, then placed it on her dashboard. She didn't know where it would all lead, but for now she knew where it started, not with a title, but with a name, not with judgment, but with a choice. Healing doesn't come with trumpets. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes it slips in quietly through the smell of fresh bread in a small-town bakery, through the soft scratch of soil under fingernails, through the thump of a dog's tail against the hardwood floor at breakfast. And in Cedar Falls, healing came one small thing at a time. Nate Carver's mornings had changed. Not dramatically. He still rose before the sun, still drank coffee that tasted like regret and resolve, still packed Rosie's lunch with too many carrot sticks and just enough peanut butter, but now there was something else, a rhythm that didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like life. Jensen Hardware had offered him a full-time position, not glamorous, not lucrative, but stable. And in a town like Cedar Falls, stability was gold. "You're steady," Carver the owner had said, and steady beats flashy, every time. Rosie had celebrated the promotion by drawing a certificate that read, "Best Fixer of Things and Dad Stuff," which Nate taped to the fridge like it was framed by gold leaf. Eleanor's world shifted in different ways. On weekends, she started planting zinnias in her small backyard, a riot of color disorderly and brave. Rosie helped most Saturdays wearing mismatched gloves and narrating each flower's imagined personality. "This one's a scientist," she'd say, patting a yellow bloom. "She likes building telescopes." Eleanor laughed more in those moments than she had in the past 5 years. "Zinnias are stubborn," she told Rosie one morning. "They bloom even when they shouldn't." Rosie grinned. Like people. The beagle came next. His name was Scout, rescued from a local shelter. Half his tail was missing, and he had a bark that sounded like a laugh caught mid-sneeze. Nate had hesitated. Dogs were a responsibility. But Rosie had knelt beside Scout's cage and whispered, "He looks like he's waiting for us." That was the end of it. Scout came home, claimed the couch, and never looked back. Of course, not everything was soft and sweet. In a town like Cedar Falls, people remember. And when people remember, they talk. The first time Eleanor overheard 2 women whispering at the farmer's market Judge Brooks and the man from that theft case, she felt her chest tighten. Not from guilt, from the weight of perception. Nate noticed her expression as they walked past the jam booth. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, with quiet clarity, "They think kindness is corruption." He looked at her eyes steady. Then let them talk. Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs time. She nodded. But that didn't make it easy. Later that week at the library, Rosie sat beside Eleanor drawing in bold colors while Scout slept under the reading bench. Another child pointed at Eleanor and asked, "Is she your grandma?" "No," Rosie said proudly. "She's my friend who reads with her whole heart." Eleanor blinked. That moment, more than a verdict or a courtroom, felt like justice. At the next town event, the Cedar Falls Fall Market, Eleanor and Nate volunteered together. They ladled soup into paper bowls, stacked hay bales for photo booths, tied ribbons on jars of homemade pickles. Neighbors nodded, some smiled, some still stared. But the ones who mattered the elderly man whose furnace Nate had fixed for free. The librarian, Eleanor, had once defended from budget cuts the parents whose kids now read out loud thanks to her weekend programs. They came closer. They thanked. They lingered. They stood beside them like windbreaks against idle talk. Near the end of the event, Rosie ran up with a small paper bag full of alphabet candy. I spelled something, she beamed. Nate looked in. Inside the letters formed a slightly crooked word, H-A-P-P-I-N-E-S. She frowned. I ran out of S's. Eleanor knelt beside her. "One is enough. You spelled it with heart." Rosie grinned. "Next time I'll spell together." That night, after Rosie was asleep and Scout had claimed Nate's side of the couch, Eleanor stood in the doorway with a mug of chamomile. "You miss being invisible, don't you?" Nate asked, handing her a blanket. She smiled into her tea. "I miss being unexamined." "They're watching now," he said softly, "waiting to see if this breaks or blooms." She met his gaze. "Then let's give them something that grows slow and strong." Nate looked down at his hands, calloused quiet. "I build things," he said. "That's what I know. How to level, brace, sand, finish. The things that last, they're never loud." Eleanor stepped closer. "Neither are we." As Scout let out a sleepy huff and the clock ticked past 9 Oisio, they stood in silence, not rushed, not declared. Just present. Neighbors still. But now, with something rooted. In the weeks that followed, the whispers dulled. The town didn't forget, but it softened. Kindness proved more persistent than suspicion, and zinnias bloomed longer than anyone expected. Some love stories don't begin with a kiss. They begin with wood shavings on a porch, with hands building in silence with a man who measures twice and sands slow because what he's making isn't furniture, it's a promise. Nate Carver stood in the workshop behind Jensen Hardware, surrounded by the smell of cedar and thyme. The bench was almost finished. Each slat of wood had been smoothed and sealed, the grain rising like quiet waves under his fingertips. He didn't follow a blueprint. This wasn't something you could order off a catalog. This was memory made solid. A wide seat just enough for 3. Curved armrests like open hands. A brass plaque would go at the center just under the backrest. He had already engraved the words himself, letter by letter A, place for second chances and good stories. The morning of the dedication, Rosie wore a dress that had ducks printed all over it. She skipped beside Eleanor, who carried a folded piece of ribbon and a small pair of golden scissors. Scout trotted ahead, tail wagging like he knew something special was coming. They reached the riverbank just past town, where the trees opened to a soft clearing. The bench stood beneath a maple tree, catching the early light like it had always belonged there. Nate waited with his toolbox, checking the bolts one last time. "Everything secure?" Eleanor asked. He glanced up. "I built this one to outlive me." Rosie clapped her hands. "Can I cut the ribbon now?" Eleanor smiled. "Go ahead, Miss Mayor." With theatrical flair, Rosie lifted the scissors and cut the red ribbon made of construction paper and glitter glue. "I declare the reading bench." "Open," she cheered. Scout barked once approval, most likely. They sat down, the 3 of them. Nate in the middle, Rosie curled beside him, Eleanor on the other side with her shoes off toes, brushing the grass. For a while, they just listened to the river, the kind of silence that only comes from deep comfort. Then Nate reached into his bag and pulled out a book. The Velveteen Rabbit. Hardcover. Well worn. He handed it to Eleanor. She opened it slowly, then stopped. Her fingers touched the inside cover where a small velvet pocket had been sewn into the lining. She reached in. A ring. Simple. Unpolished. Handmade like the bench. Silver with a knot detail at the center. No diamond, no sparkle, just purpose and permanence. Nate cleared his throat, voice rough but clear. "I'm no good with speeches, but I know how to build things. Things that take time, that don't fall apart when they're weathered. That's what I want for us." He turned to face her fully. "I don't need a perfect story. I just want a true one. With you. With Rosie. On this bench and everyone that comes after." Rosie covered her mouth with both hands. "He's really doing it." Eleanor didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked down at the ring, then back at the man who had once pulled over in a storm because something inside him refused to leave another person stranded. "I've spent my whole life believing in the letter of the law," she said softly, "but you've taught me to believe in the spirit of it, too." She slipped the ring on. "Yes." Just like that. No fanfare. Just a word as certain as sunrise. Rosie threw her arms around both of them. "Now, Scout has to forgive you for never letting him on the good couch." Later, they took turns reading from The Velveteen Rabbit. Rosie insisted on reading the part about becoming real. "It doesn't happen all at once," the skin horse said. "You become." It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Nate's voice was thick when he whispered, "We're real now, huh?" Eleanor nodded. "We always were." That night, the town of Cedar Falls felt just a little different, like something had clicked into place that had long been missing. At Murphy's Diner, Bev taped a photo to the corkboard wall, Nate, Eleanor, Rosie, and Scout on the bench mid-laughter. The caption read, "Second chances," and "Good stories." Eleanor's colleagues at the courthouse heard the news in hushed tones. Some raised eyebrows, some shook heads. But Judge Brooks didn't flinch. She showed up on time, ruled fair, and went home to a house that now had laughter in its walls. Maya Chen, of course, had already known. When she stopped by with a celebratory pie, she just handed it to Nate and said, "Took you long enough." He grinned. "Some things are worth measuring twice." She winked. "Just make sure you keep sanding the corners." That weekend at the farmer's market, Rosie led Scout around wearing a homemade badge that said, "Official Bench Detective." A woman leaned in and asked Eleanor, "Do you ever regret it? Mixing your life and your robe." Eleanor sipped her coffee and replied without hesitation, "Justice isn't something you hang on the wall. It's something you sit on share stories on build from. I'd say this bench is the most honest verdict I've ever rendered." At sunset, the bench waited, and one by one people came. An older man with a dog who missed his wife, a teenager reading quietly between shifts, a mother who whispered stories into her sleeping baby's ear, and sometimes, just sometimes, a judge, a builder, and a little girl with a heart too big for her backpack. They sat, they read, they healed, because some benches hold more than weight. They hold memory. They hold forgiveness. They hold the kind of love that doesn't shout, but stays. Not all weddings begin with a string quartet. Some begin with the hum of fairy lights strung across a backyard fence with the aroma of potluck casseroles warming in borrowed slow cookers with the laughter of children, racing barefoot through grass that's slightly too long and a beagle in a bow tie trying to steal a bread roll. And in Cedar Falls, that's exactly how it started. The Carver Brooks wedding wasn't in a church or a hall. It was in the backyard behind Eleanor's house, now their house. A wide patch of land bordered by trees, the same land where zinnias had bloomed defiantly just weeks earlier. Scout paced near the porch steps like a four-legged usher. Rosie had insisted on making him best dog. He took the title seriously. Overhead, strands of golden light swayed in the breeze. Neighbors brought folding chairs. Some stood. Some leaned against fences. Everyone felt like they belonged, even the ones who weren't sure they would. Maya Chen wore a navy blue dress and held a mason jar of sweet tea like it was a gavel. "I've stood in front of a lot of juries," she said, raising her glass. "But today, I'm just honored to witness a verdict that needs no deliberation. Love, resilience, and a bench that holds it all." She nodded toward the reading bench at the far corner of the yard, decorated with fresh flowers, and a small sign Rosie had drawn in crayon reserved for forever. Rosie, dressed in white sneakers and a flower crown, danced in erratic circles. Her official title was Joy Coordinator, a role she had invented herself. Her job, make it joyfuller, she explained earlier, because sometimes adults forget. She threw petals like confetti and shouted, "Cue the love," just as Nate walked out from the back porch adjusting his tie with hands that could rebuild engines, but still trembled now. When he saw Eleanor walking toward him, sunlight catching the edge of her hair, her robe replaced by a soft gray dress, he forgot everything else. Even Scout sat. The ceremony was short. There were no lengthy vows, no rehearsed declarations, just two people standing eye to eye speaking plain truths with hearts wide open. Nate went first. "I've built porches, patched roofs, fixed broken locks. But you are the first thing I ever built with the hope it would last forever." Eleanor blinked quickly, then smiled. "You once said you weren't good at speeches, but you build with your hands. And I've learned those are the promises that hold." They exchanged rings again, this time with Rosie's help. She handed them over with great ceremony, announcing, "Don't drop them. We only brought one set." Everyone laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that thins the air with grace. Afterward, there was dancing, if you could call it that. The playlist was half old country, half children's movie soundtracks. Scout howled during a slow waltz. The mailman tripped during a line dance. And somewhere between slices of lemon pie and sparkler fountains, Cedar Falls felt less like a town and more like a family reunion. Under the canopy of lights, Nate pulled Eleanor into a quiet sway, hand on her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. He whispered, "You remember the night I stopped in the rain?" She nodded. I remember thinking if he was a stranger who stopped for someone else. Maybe I didn't have to be alone in this world. "And I remember your voice," he said. "You said I saved more than a night." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "You stopped your truck," she said, voice barely a breath. But later, "You stopped something bigger, a machine that would have rolled over truth if no one stood in its way." "You made it stop," he whispered. "No," she corrected gently. "We did." Their foreheads touched. Around them, children laughed. Neighbors clinked glasses. But in that small space, there was stillness. A house called us, built not with blueprints but with mercy and hard choices and earned joy. Later, Rosie pulled them both toward the bench and made them sit. She crawled up between them, still sticky from cake, holding a new drawing she'd made during the party. It showed the three of them, Eleanor, Nate, and Rosie, under a roof with the word "Home" scrawled in bold crayon above them. "This is our house now," she said. "Even if it doesn't have walls, it's still real." Eleanor kissed her forehead. The best kind always are. In the weeks that followed, the town buzzed with warmth. Not just about the wedding, but about the way it happened. Victor Hale was under formal indictment. The DA released a statement confirming that tampered evidence had been discovered through the perseverance of court-appointed counsel and an exceptionally fair bench. No names were mentioned, but the town knew, and more importantly, they remembered. People stopped whispering in grocery aisles. They started smiling instead, leaving anonymous notes, dropping off books for the bench. One evening, Nate came home to find a crate of fresh lumber left on their porch with a note for the next bench. Eleanor picked up a new case child welfare this time and approached it with the same diligence she always had. But now her chambers had a new chair, Scout's, and the photo of the reading bench, and a crayon drawing of a roofless house with a caption that read, "Built from love, stays standing." Some nights they sat on that bench again. Just the three of them. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to, because when you've weathered storms, silence becomes its own kind of music. Because when you've fought for what's right, the quiet feels earned. Because when you found your people, you don't need a bigger house. You just need a place where everyone fits Scar's stories, second chances and all. And so Cedar Falls kept on spinning. Not faster, not louder, just better. Because a town doesn't change through headlines. It changes through people who stay and build something that lasts. It began, as many stories do not, with fanfare or finality, but with something quiet. A soft breeze whispering over Cedar Falls. A book cracking open on a bench beside the river. And a little girl's voice, clear and bright, page 1. Once upon a time, in a town with no dragons but plenty of brave people, a year had passed. The bench Nate built stood steady by the riverside, weathered now, but only in the way good things are shaped by time, made smoother by hands that use them. Today, 4 kids crowded around Eleanor as she read aloud. Rosie sat closest knees, tucked up under her chin arms around Scout, who had somehow become the neighborhood's unofficial emotional support animal. Across from them, Nate tightened a bolt on the armrest. He wiped his hands with a cloth, tested the arm, nodded once in approval. "You fixed it again," Eleanor said, not looking up from the page. Nate grinned. "Wasn't broken. Just squeaked like it needed a hug." "That's the kind of fixing I like best," she said, turning another page. A mother passed by with a stroller. A teenage boy on a bike slowed, caught the sound of the story, and lingered. A retired teacher set a thermos down on the bench's far end and simply listened. Ripples. That's what they were. Small things that moved outward. A bench. A story. A moment where no one had to pretend they were too busy for kindness. Later, as the sun slid west, Rosie ran ahead while Nate and Eleanor followed the footpath back toward town. Eleanor slipped her hand into his. "That bench has more stories than our living room," she said. "And better views," he chuckled. At Murphy's Diner, they found Maya nursing a milkshake and editing something on her laptop. "Don't judge me," she said as they sat. "I write closing arguments to jazz music and dessert." "You're among friends," Eleanor said warmly. Maya turned the screen around. "I'm finalizing a talk I've been asked to give. Law schools want to know about the Carver case, about evidence ethics, the miracle of a GPS ping at just the right time." Nate chuckled. "Tell them it was less a miracle and more a tired dad with a stubborn streak." But Maya shook her head. "No. I'll tell them it was a town that remembered how to pay attention, and a judge who held the line when it would have been easier to look away." Her gaze landed gently on Eleanor. Cedar Falls didn't just get justice, it learned how to see. That night, after Rosie was tucked in, Nate and Eleanor sat on the porch. Fireflies blinked in the distance. Scout sighed deeply at their feet, tail twitching in sleep. "Think anyone sits on the bench when we're not there?" Nate asked. Eleanor smiled. "I hope so." "Think anyone starts a story without finishing it?" "Sometimes," she said. "But even unfinished stories have echoes." Nate leaned back. "I keep thinking about that night. The rain. The red sedan. You standing there like you'd fought the whole world but still had some grace left to offer." She turned to him, eyes soft. "And I remember the man who stopped without asking why. Just because." He nodded slowly. "Do you think people change because of one moment? Or is it all the little ones after both?" she said. "The moment opens the door. But the little ones, they make you walk through." A week later, they found a note tucked between the slats of the reading bench. "In uneven handwriting, someone read to me here last week. I didn't think anyone remembered I existed. They did. Thank you. No name, no return address. Just truth." Eleanor pressed the note to her chest. "That's why we keep showing up," she whispered. And so they did, month after month. Rosie hosted a Saturday Reading Rangers Club where kids read aloud in turns, even if some only managed a sentence before blushing and giggling. It didn't matter. They were heard. Maya returned to help launch a free legal literacy workshop at the library Know Your Rights and Your Neighbors Too. And every Sunday, Nate fixed what was loose. Hinges, fences, broken doorbells. He never asked for thanks, but people still gave it. A jar of peach jam. A handmade thank you card. A whispered, "You helped me, more than you know." On the bench, Rosie added a new sign one afternoon. Painted letters slightly uneven, but full of heart. "If you're here, you're not alone." And under it, in smaller script, "Tell your story. Someone needs to hear it." As the final rays of summer light sank low, Nate asked Eleanor one last question. "Do you ever wonder, if we hadn't met that night, if the storm hadn't come, what would have happened?" She reached for his hand. "No," she said, "because I believe in the story that did happen, the one we wrote with choices, not chances." And then, for a moment, there was only stillness, and breath, and the slow ripple of peace stretching across the water. Maybe tonight, somewhere quiet, someone sits on a bench and makes a small choice to listen to, help to not turn away. And maybe that one quiet act becomes the start of someone else's second chance. Because if this story reminded us of anything, it's that the smallest kindness can echo farther than we'll ever know. That doing the right thing, especially when no one's watching, isn't just character. It's legacy. And sometimes all it takes to heal a fracture is to hold a hand steady just long enough until the next heartbeat comes. So now I turn to you. Where are you watching from? What's the kindest thing a stranger ever did for you? Was it a word, a moment, a night, when you thought no one saw you? But someone did. If you've lived it or simply witnessed it, share it in the comments below. Your story might be the next reason someone decides to hold on. And if you're just now realizing you have a story worth telling, maybe this is your sign to start. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in stories that heal, in voices that comfort, and in reminders that even in the rain, someone might be on their way to help. Leave a comment, share this video with someone who might need it today, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story waiting to find you. From our little storytelling bench to wherever you are tonight, thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in goodness. And above all, thank you for watching.